Thank you, John. So imagine a massive disaster striking in which aid workers are overwhelmed, and many of the victims left behind are poor, elderly, disabled, people of color. The natural disaster of Katrina in 2005 was a watershed moment for American poverty, because people all of a sudden looked at their television screens and realized, oh my gosh, poverty still exists in this country. Who'd have thunk it? And the reality is that what we saw at that moment was nothing compared to the reality of the poverty as an unnatural disaster from 2008 and continuing on. That with, as you saw on the slides at the very beginning of today, the impact, not just in the rest of the country, but here in Silicon Valley, we're still seeing the ripple effects of the foreclosures, the unemployment rates, the families separated, the issue of businesses not recovering, the reality of two economies happening right here in the Valley. When Dickens wrote A Tale of Two Cities, he started out with, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And the reality is we're seeing that here in the Valley. We see this incredible resource of knowledge, of capital, of innovation right here in this room. And at the same time, not even a block from here, we see families that are living 3 to 4 families in one 2-bedroom house because they can't afford the rent. People struggling to make ends meet on minimum wage when it takes that $70,000 for a family of 4 to make ends meet in the Valley that you saw. So a number of years ago, people said, this is enough. We can't do this anymore. We can't keep using the same old solutions for the same old problem because they're not working. The reality is poverty is getting too great for us to handle, and the old solutions aren't working. So what do we do? So globally, you have this movement with the global challenge, the Millennium Challenge, right? Where people are saying, for those that are at the base of the pyramid living on $2 a day, we need to find new solutions to poverty. Nationally, Catholic Charities USA launched the Campaign to Reduce Poverty in America and has a number of national partners that have signed on, including United Way, Worldwide, Feed America, so America's Harvest, a number of other organizations of community economic development. And locally, we said, there's no way that one organization, one sector, can solve the reality of poverty. So with Catholic Charities, we formed what the group at the beginning called, and is now called, StepUp Silicon Valley, where we said, we need not just the nonprofit sector, not just the communities in need, not just the faith community, not just government, not just businesses, not just academia, but the entire community to step up and say, we can find new, creative, innovative solutions to cutting poverty. So as we formed this collaborative, this collective impact strategy, we struggled. We said, how do we pull these partners together? How do we share this vision? It's a huge vision. It's enormous. People said, oh my gosh, there's no way that we can cut poverty in half by 2020, much less end poverty. But I submit that unless we have that vision, the people perish. And people are perishing every night in this valley because of poverty. The 7,000 that are homeless tonight, right down the street, that are in danger of perishing. So we have an urgent call to change the way we're doing things. We need to innovate. We have to. We don't have any choice. It's innovate or perish. And if we're a community, we need to say, we are a community. We stand for one another. As Benjamin Franklin said, surely, we'll either hang separately or we'll hang together. So we need to hang together. But how are we going to do this? It can't just be, as I said before, the nonprofit sector or just the public sector or the private philanthropy. It's got to be finding these creative solutions that people are talking about here today. So one example of that is an example that I'm just really, really thrilled about. Was when we created StepUp Silicon Valley, we realized, okay, it's too big to handle everything all at once. We've got 5 key areas: food, housing, healthcare, education, and income. Each of these, we've got groups working on them separately. For housing, we have Destination Home. For food, there's Second Harvest Food Bank. For education, there's San Jose 2020 and other initiatives with big goals. Around healthcare reform, there are all these major initiatives around healthcare reform. And around income and wealth development, there are numerous strategies. But all of these have existed in silos and have developed their strategies around their own issue. So how do we pull them all together? And then at the same time, how do we prove the case? So we have this big idea, and then we said we need to go small. And it was around the time that Barack Obama was running for president, and all the presidential candidates had these plans for how they were going to end poverty. And David Gruski at the Center for Study of Poverty and Inequality at Stanford came out with this magazine, and then, lo and behold, in that magazine, I saw candidate Barack Obama then at that point said, I propose taking the model of the Harlem Children's Zone and expanding that through a Promise Neighborhood strategy in 20 cities nationally, and piloting this neighborhood-based strategy. And we said, aha, there's a way to test it within just a few blocks. So we looked at a number of neighborhoods and realized the Santee neighborhood had been asking for help for years. And you know, the neighborhoods are littered with the bones of well-meaning strategies and policies and organizations trying to help. But in that neighborhood, we had a terrific partnership with the city, with Strong Neighborhoods Initiative. We had community organizers. We had the Franklin McKinley School District. We had Catholic Charities, Second Harvest Food Bank, the business, the homeowners and the landlords in the community, and most of all, the moms. And the moms in the community were saying, we need 3 things. We need quality education for our kids, we need safety for our kids going to and from school, and we need to learn English, and we need jobs ourselves. And so we went deep in that neighborhood. We got the partners together. We were able to get funding because of each of us, like Kip was saying, it was like stone soup. Everybody put in a little bit, what we could. And Elizabeth Alvarez, if you haven't met Elizabeth, raise your hand. She is community organizer par excellence. Nobody steal her. She is really terrific. She's organized that neighborhood in a way that is just awesome. To say the people in that neighborhood have that power and voice now to speak out in schools. The moms are being able to speak out to administrators. The children are learning. The whole Kinder Academy that got developed spread throughout the entire district. And now EduCare wants to build a state-of-the-art early childhood development center in that neighborhood. Again, that's just one opportunity, one imagination of saying we can socially innovate in one neighborhood, 16 blocks. It's amazing that that can happen, and it's already happening now just within the last year and a half. Awesome. The other reality as we look at the issue of poverty is the issue that we need not just to create, you know, these innovative projects 16 blocks at a time, but we really need to change the awareness of people. And one of the ways we've done that through StepUp Silicon Valley is through these poverty simulations. And this ties in with IDEO's piece of having that analogous experience. So people for just a couple hours go through a poverty simulation and they experience walking in the shoes of people, the frustrations, the struggles of people in poverty. And at the end of that, so the gatekeepers in this process are former clients. So they're people who have walked in poverty, who know the story, and then at the end of that, they share their story, and then we move to action, and dialogue, and then action. It's an awesome experience that we've been doing not just with faith communities, not just with the universities, but also with Cisco, with Bank of America, with Synaptics, and with other corporations. So it's another way to engage the broader community in realizing the reality of what it is to walk in poverty. So we have that awareness strategy. We have the incubation of ideas like the Franklin McKinley Children's Initiative, and as you heard Almaz describe the Franklin McKinley Women's Initiative, which came out of that because the women said, we're having a hard time getting jobs, we need to start our own businesses. So then we teamed up with the Women's Initiative for Self-Employment, and they had these classes, 31 women graduated, 5 have started their businesses, and a number of us nonprofits and corporations are now using the caterers from the Franklin McKinley Women's Initiative, which is awesome. So there's a whole new entrepreneurial move afoot with that. But beyond that, there's a need to change policy. So a third key area for StepUp, beyond awareness, beyond the incubation, is advocacy. And StepUp has partnered with a number of really effective other coalitions, like the Coalition Against Payday Predators around payday lending, or with the food providers around getting the policy changed at the state level. We've been working at this for years, and it finally passed this last year, where they're no longer fingerprinting. California was one of, I think, 2 states that fingerprinted people if you wanted to get food stamps. CalFresh. Imagine, you want food, prove that you are who you are with a fingerprint. Otherwise, you don't get food. Imagine that. Imagine standing in that line and having to be fingerprinted before you got food. That was our state. That's no longer the case. It used to be that you had to go and recertify 4 times a year to be able to get food. So you had to, you want people to be self-sufficient, you want people to work, but then the people would have to take off work to go get the food, to sign up to get the food, and they would have to stand in line, right, for the application process. So those things are changing. The systems are changing through advocacy, through both the internal advocacy within government, but also the external pressure from the community to say, enough's enough. People need the basics of food, housing, healthcare, education, and an income sufficient to make ends meet. And that's what we're about with StepUp Silicon Valley, to help that reality be a reality for every single resident in this valley. So what do I propose? So there's an incubation element for StepUp called NOCRA. It's a national piece of legislation that a group of us helped draft. It's the National Opportunity and Community Renewal Act, NOCRA, lousy acronym, but it's a great bill. Because what it does is it creates a pilot project like Promise Neighborhoods that allows 10 areas, 7 urban areas, 3 rural, 1 with a military base, to innovate, to create social innovation to end poverty in their local community. And what would this do? It would do things like create a mega waiver around public benefits. Public folks are going to get really nervous on this. Mega waiver around public benefits. So we're already doing it in housing with the housing to work model, so it's not, it shouldn't be too far out of the box for some of the public sector. Market driven. Find the profit motive to help people cut poverty. So let me tell you just a little brief story on this. I heard this on the radio a while back. You heard about the prisoners from England in the 18th century that were shipped off to Australia, right? They shipped them off to Australia because they could no longer ship them off to to the colonies because we broke away and became independent, right? So they couldn't ship the prisoners here anymore. And the prisons were full in England, and the prison ships on the Thames were rotting and falling apart. So they shipped them off to Australia, and they packed them in the old slave ships that they were no longer using, and most of the prisoners died. And then Parliament grumbled, religious communities complained, and so they said, okay, well, we'll put doctors on the ships, we'll make sure there's rum, and we'll make sure there's limes, and the doctors drank the rum and sold the limes, and the prisoners died. So then they went to some young, smart student at the London School of Economics. This is where academia comes in, right? And this young, smart student at the London School of Economics said, how are the sea captains getting paid? And they said, well, they're getting paid for every prisoner they take on board ship. Pay them for every live one that walks off the ship. That's what I propose. How are the captains of today's industry getting paid? Let's figure out a way to create a way to incentivize whether it's through social enterprise, through the model called the base of the pyramid protocol, or through microenterprise, or through whatever capital structures, social venture capital, that will create not just wealth distribution, but wealth generation. So one model of that, a number of us formed a think tank session a few weeks ago called around social impact bonds or human capital performance bonds. And again, this model from England, but there's also a model in Minnesota. Steve Rothschild with Twin Cities Rise and now Invest in Outcomes created this model in Minnesota. Quick story on Twin Cities Rise. A number of years ago, Steve left General Mills and he was head of Yoplait. He saw the need of the community, saw African-American men in prison that coming out of prison weren't getting jobs and they were heading back to prison. He said, I want to reduce poverty. Let's create a system so these guys are able to stay out of prison and are able to make a living to make ends meet. So he created Twin Cities Rise and he figured out a return on investment for the state. He said, if you pay me $9,000 up front, I'll get them a job, and 2 years later, pay me $9,000 if they still have that job and are making over $20,000. And the state said, sure, we'll do that. And by the way, by doing that, it saved the state $60,000 over the course of each of those 2 years. So he said, I'm saving you money. There's a way to monetize this and turn it into a bond issue. Can we create a model where private investors can invest in bonds issued by the state that have nonprofits performing outcomes that actually save taxpayers' money, reduce the deficit, and make a profit for investors and help people make ends meet and end poverty? Awesome. So they're trying that now. It's just a test. They got a Republican legislature and a Democratic governor to prove that. Amazing. They're doing this in England as well. They call it social impact bonds. Rockefeller Foundation is working on incubating these ideas around the country. And our goal with NACRA is to create Santa Clara County as one of those sites where we can do something like that. So that's the next social innovative idea, is to find a way, to create a way to bring capital, social venture capital, that brings an investment in that helps people get out of poverty. We'll figure it out. It'll happen. It'll happen. So what do I propose? That we become, as Santa Clara, we formally become part of this global movement to end poverty. We start at home. Make us a NACRA site that's holistic, client-focused, market-based, outcome-driven, systems-changing, and locally led. We secure those mega waivers for public services and benefits. We form an agreement among the key sectors that we share the vision of ending poverty and creating economic opportunity for all in order for our community, and to hold ourselves accountable. We need to coordinate our strategies, I said before, whether it's around homelessness, education, housing, food, income, or healthcare. Have each sector test its most creative solution. So do the pilot, evaluate, redesign, evaluate, scale, test and see what works. So there's the base of the pyramid protocol where you bring a large for-profit corporation with a low-income community with an NGO or an intermediary to bring them together to co-create value. Different than micro-enterprise. It's a macro-enterprise new model. That's one thing to test. Doing the promotoras, the micro-enterprise from the Franklin McKinley Women's Initiative, the co-op model, the place-based model. Test them all out. The city is awesome. They've decided we're going to invest our community development block grant and test it in 3 place-based areas. In Mayfair, where we are now, in the Santee, and in the Five Wounds Brookwood Terrace. That's a great investment by the city in the local community and partnership to say, okay, we're going to test this out. We don't know that this works, but we believe in the local community having a say and being able to be creative that way. So piloting those cross-sector models in the local community. So the next thing is we need to secure the alternative funding through the market-based strategy. So the social impact bonds, tax credits, social enterprises. Then we also need to implement shared technology for our benefits and analysis. So one of the issues, I always feel like here in Silicon Valley, I feel like the cobbler's children without any shoes, right? We're in this area of incredible technical innovation, and yet both our public and nonprofit sectors are struggling. We don't have common indicators. We don't have common outcome indicators. We don't have common technology database platforms. We have different systems for people applying for benefits. On the one hand, health systems are using one e-app and social services are using Benefits CalWin. I don't care which system we use, make it easy for the client. So, I appreciated the whole discussion of finding those pain points, and then I'd love to figure out how we move to a 90-day scale. I'd love to figure out how to do those rapid transformations. But we have the power of technology right here. We have just incredible minds. We have the ability to do this. Let's make it happen. So what will it take to make this happen? There are 6 things that need to change. First, our beliefs. Most people believe poverty is inevitable. It's not. People, okay, they say, oh, Greg, you're from Catholic Charities. Isn't it say in the Bible, the poor you will always have with you? Yeah, that's probably true because, being Catholic is because we're sinners, right? But it's maybe another way of saying it is, yes, but maybe they don't have to be so many, and they don't have to be as poor. And maybe there's another way of saying the poor will always be with us in that they will be on our side if we are doing the right thing and helping change the world. The second is to change our thinking. So the thinking that poverty is caused by personal, moral, or intellectual failure. I think we need to rethink and analyze the causes of poverty and the solutions of poverty. And that means changing our attitudes from blame to pity to justice to compassion to standing with our brothers and sisters, figuring out what our motivations are. We talked at our table about the motivation of shared or mutual self-interest and altruism, that both of those are very human motivations. So tap into those. We need to change our language, and I need to work on this myself. So often we talk about the poor, the homeless, the 1% and the 99%. Maybe we can shift our language from client and provider to neighbor, partner, participant, coworker, friend. And then we need to change our behaviors. As employers, what's our behavior in terms of just wages and benefits, access to dependent care and educational opportunities? As empowered worker, what's our behavior? Are we the complainers, or are we going to choose our power and speak up and find solutions? As providers, as funders, to rethink philanthropy. Now we're getting more engaged philanthropy that's focused on outcomes, which is exactly the right thing that needs to happen, to be creative and focus on funding what works, and at the same time, focus on those partnerships of co-creating the community that we want to see. And as engaged citizens, educating ourselves through voting, advocating, complaining to City Hall, but standing with our brothers and sisters in need. And most radical, I think we need to change our relationships and sense of community. What will revolutionize how we care for those who are in need, how we form community to be with one another, how we change our attitude of haves and have-nots to being brothers and sisters? So how do we get there? There's some certain elements that we need to make sure are included. So first of all, we turn the crisis of Katrina or of the 2008 economic disaster into an opportunity. Then we focus on leadership. There's catalytic leadership and there's distributed leadership. So pulling those leadership qualities, giving people the opportunities to have their voice, to make their voice, to stand firm and to say, this is what I think. What do you think? To have that vision, to hold fast to a vision of a thriving community, that we're not just barely surviving or just striving, but we're really thriving. Need to have the institutional support. It's very practical, the intermediary support. And I want to give a shout out to American Leadership Forum, because a lot of these principles I learned from American Leadership Forum. We need to have, ultimately, courage, persistence, and hope. And I learned this from one of my board members who was formerly homeless, or as Norm would say, I wasn't homeless, I was unhoused. Palo Alto was my home, I just didn't have a house. But he had courage, persistence, and hope, and we as a community need that. So, some principles. Number one principle, don't duplicate, collaborate. That's what we're about here today. Community Organizing 101, it's those one-on-one conversations. We heard that from IDEO. Recruit the unlikely allies, both participants and the corporations. Develop those personal relationships. The ALF model of having that intense overnight retreat, having the moment of silence before we meet, having the dialogues, the true listening, it's so critical in terms of forming a sense of community. Find some way to get emotionally engaged, even if it's only through a poverty simulation, something to give you that aha and that kick in the gut that I've got to do something. And then use whatever group engagement tools work for you, whether it's open space technology, the World Cafe, Dialogue Quadrilateral, whatever those tools are, use those and make it as easy as possible for people to participate. I was asked to say, what are 3 pitfalls to avoid and why? Never do for others what they can do for themselves. Don't promise to the community that you can't deliver. Don't compromise on your principles or your vision. And I added a 4th, don't try to do it all yourself. That's why we're here as a community. So finally, I am just so amazed and encouraged by what I'm seeing out in the community, that I'm seeing children that feel safe walking to and from school, that kids are leaving gangs, that women are finding their voice as they learn English and finding their pride as they start their own businesses, that people that once were homeless are now housed, that people that were suffering because of lack of health care have health care and are improving in their health, and that people that were struggling without an income now are able to make ends meet. This is the vision of cutting poverty. This is the vision of ending poverty. This is the vision of finding those first steps to opportunity. This is the vision of building the road as we travel. That we create the community. And so together, we need to take those first steps on that road. So step up, Silicon Valley. Thank you.